Hello creative friends, I'm Anastasia and welcome back to my channel. Over the years, I've done several home decor DIYs using fabric, and these are still pieces I love to decorate with today. I thought it would be fun to combine those projects into one video. Fabric is something I often find very low cost at the thrift store, and there's just so much you can do with it. Most of the fabrics in this video are thrifted and some were bought new, but whether your fabric is store-bought or from someone's grandma's attic, I think you'll find a ton of inspiration in this video for some easy yet beautiful decor projects. Let's go! I found this pillow at a local thrift store and I bought it because inside there's a beautiful down pillow that's in great condition and it was only $5. I like to wash my thrifted pillows just in the washing machine, so I'm putting this one in there along with another down pillow on the other side to balance it out, and I'm washing on a delicate cycle. I'm drying them on a low heat with dryer balls to make them fluffy, and I had to run them 4 or 5 times on low so that they were completely dry. I ordered a new pillowcase on Amazon and I want to create a block print pattern on it. Hobby Lobby has a pretty good collection of stamps and I found these 2 floral ones which I felt were pretty similar to the popular block print styles that I'm seeing on lots of pillows and blankets in stores. I practiced a bunch of times on an extra piece of linen that I had and I ended up choosing this more simple flower. If you have a thinner fabric, I recommend putting a piece of cardboard between the layers to avoid bleed through. I'm mixing coffee bean with a little berry wine paint to get the exact color I want. I brushed on a light layer of paint, and on this first one I pressed pretty hard, and you can see that it had some excess paint around the border, so on the next one I went a little lighter on the paint and I didn't press as hard, and it turned out perfect. Brushing the paint on the stamp was time consuming, so I made my own kind of ink pad by brushing a light layer of paint on my paint tray, then pressing my stamp into that, and it worked a lot faster that way. I'm just eyeballing the lines, but you can mark your lines with painter's tape if you want. I made sure my first line was pretty straight, and then I used the stems to line up my stamp for each row that followed. I'm stamping each flower in between the 2 flowers above it so that the rows are offset from each other. I love the variation that this has because each stamp does turn out a little bit differently. It gives it that handmade look that block printing is known for, since traditionally it's all stamped by hand rather than printed by a machine. It took a while to complete the pattern, but I put a TV show on and I absolutely loved doing this project. To set the paint, you want to apply some sort of heat, whether it be an iron or the dryer. So I put mine in the dryer on a high heat for a couple of minutes. This turned out even better than I thought it would, and it makes me want to try this on other pillows, lampshades, or cafe curtains because I really love this result. I had a vision for this lampshade to be really fun and patterned. I picked out this fabric from Spoonflower. Look at that. Isn't that so pretty? First, we make a template. So I've got my gigantic sheet of packing paper here, and you can use whatever you have. You can even use some scrap fabric if you have a piece big enough to make your template on, or an old bed sheet, whatever you have really. So just gonna trace this out. If you're working with an empire shade like this, what I like to do to trace it is to start at this seam and use that as your guide, because you're gonna end up with a cut that's like a U shape. And so you kind of start at the seam and then mark where that seam is on your paper and roll it as you trace, trace, and then you're gonna get to the seam. The seam's gonna hit the table again at this side, and then that's where you stop. So you don't take it all the way in a full circle. You just go from where the seam hits to that side, where the seam hits on that side. All right, look at that. I've made my paper template. This is a good template that we're gonna go off of for the fabric cutting. So now I've got to figure out what parts of this pattern I want. So I'm gonna place my template over my favorite part of the fabric. I'm just gonna use some painter's tape to tape this to the fabric since my paper wants to bend. That's just gonna hold it in place for now. And then I'm gonna take my fabric marker and draw a line onto the fabric, tracing my template. And I'm just gonna leave like a 1-inch clearance on all sides around it, just so I have a little extra fabric to work with. All right, got my finished piece. Looks perfect. Moment of truth. It's always so scary, even though I know I measured. Oh, thank goodness. Yes, that is so beautiful. It's gonna be so pretty. To make a clean looking seam, I folded over about 1/2 inch of the fabric and ironed it. This is optional because we'll also be gluing this piece down, but I just wanted a nice crisp line. I took the fabric outside to use this Gorilla Spray adhesive to coat the backside of the fabric. It's best to let this get tacky for 1 to 3 minutes before you apply it to the shade. Now I'm back inside and I folded over that edge that I ironed. And I'm very carefully placing the shade on the fabric in the correct spot and rolling it until it's completely covered. The glue does have a few minutes of working time, so I'm just going around and pulling on the fabric at the top and bottom to make sure there's no wrinkles or bubbles and that the fabric is pulled nice and taut all the way around the shade. I'm trimming off some of the excess fabric here because I only need enough to wrap around the bottom lip and top lip of the shade. I'm spraying a tiny bit more glue on and wrapping the fabric around the lip and pinching it so it holds on. This was honestly the most fun part of this shade to me. And I did the same with the top of the shade, and I just cut a little slit in the fabric to fold around the metal frame. To glue that seam down really close to the edge, I'm using some E6000 adhesive. I am just head over heels for these beautiful carved wood frames. The original tag says they were $18.99 brand new, but they were only $5 each at the thrift store, which I was so happy to pay because the details are stunning and the wood tone matches the other furniture in my house so well. I'm adding some hanging hardware, and I'll link this picture hanging kit below because it comes in handy with a lot of thrifted frames. I want to create a fabric mat for these, so I'm cutting some foam core board to size. For the fabric, I found this pillowcase at Goodwill for $1.99 that I just love the colors and pattern of, so I'm cutting it to fit the foam board. A thin layer of Mod Podge will do the trick to hold this in place. I grabbed some glass from some old frames I had, and I'm attaching some pictures with double-sided tape so that they're easy to change out if I ever want to. Now I want these frames to look like they are hung by a ribbon, so I'm also making some frayed ribbon out of the same fabric. To do this, I'm simply cutting it into strips and then pulling threads from the sides to create that frayed edge. This will work best on cotton or cotton blend fabrics. My advice is to try to only pull a few threads at a time because pulling a large section will get pretty difficult down the line. I made 2 long strips and I'm tying one of those into a bow. Then I'm putting a small thumbtack through the back of the bow and sticking that second strip of ribbon onto it. So I now have a bow with a long strip down the center. Now I popped that thumbtack right into the sheetrock, and then I'm putting my picture hanging nails right through the ribbon to hang the frames. This ended up having a very whimsical and cottagey feeling to it that I love so much. I used a piece of foam core board and I cut it down to the exact dimensions of the frame using a really sharp knife. So once I've cut out my mat shape with the foam board, I'm gonna wrap that in linen fabric that I thrifted. It was a thrifted shower curtain. And I'm using some Gorilla Glue adhesive spray to spray that on the mat, let it get a little tacky, and then press it onto your linen and wrap the edges around. This is a super easy beginner DIY that did not take very long at all, so you can really do this for any of your frames, even if they're not a strange dimension. And it's now one of my favorite frames because I love that linen mat look. I've been seeing a lot of these adorable pleated lampshades coming back in style, so I wanted to experiment with upcycling some of my thrifted shades in this way. I thrifted this twin bed sheet for 99 cents, which I'm going to use for fabric. You essentially want to cut a bunch of strips that are an inch or two longer than the height of your lampshade. And you want them to be about 2 inches wide. I used the entire length of the twin sheet for this lampshade, so definitely keep in mind that you will need a lot more fabric than you think you will. Once I've got my 2-inch strips, I'm going to iron down one side of the fabric. So I'm folding in one side to about the middle and then ironing it down. This creates a pretty finished edge for our pleats. The rest of this is very repetitive because we are just hot gluing all of these strips to the lampshade. But I'll first share my mistake so y'all don't make the same mistake. I was spacing out the strips the same distance at the top as they were at the bottom, which was creating this major slant to my pleats. So I learned that on a tapered shade like this, you want the fabric strips to be close to each other at the top and farther from each other at the bottom. So you can see that I'm gluing them about 1/4 of an inch apart at the top and about 3/4 of an inch apart at the bottom. Once I've hot glued them all the way around at the top, then I'm going around and adjusting the spacing at the bottom, then gluing those down as well. I'm trimming off the excess fabric at the top, leaving just a little bit extra to wrap around the top lip. Then I'm just hot gluing inside that rim and folding the fabric down over it. I'm doing the same thing to the bottom, so I trimmed off the extra. Now I'm hot gluing inside the rim and folding that fabric around. You could call it finished here, but I wanted to cover up those rough looking edges on the inside, so I got an extra strip of fabric and I'm hot gluing that all the way around at the top and the bottom of the shade to give it a more finished look. Now I wouldn't call this a quick DIY, but I would do this again. I could also see myself trying this with some 2-inch ribbon so that I can skip the step of cutting all of the fabric. The smaller size of this lamp just felt like a kitchen lamp to me, and it fit perfectly under my cabinets, so I styled it here in my kitchen with some other thrifted decor. Thank you all so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss my upcoming projects and DIYs. And I would love to know in the comments which project is your favorite. I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.